As Evelyn and Max made their way through the park that evening, the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the pathway. The air was cool, carrying with it the faint scent of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass. Birds chirped softly in the distance, and the occasional rustle of leaves signaled the presence of squirrels darting between trees. It was the kind of serene setting that made people feel safe, as if nothing bad could ever happen here. Unknown to Evelyn, two figures were watching her from afar. Jake and Marcus had been loitering near the edge of the park for hours, waiting for an opportunity to strike. They weren't locals, just drifters passing through town, looking for easy money. Both men had troubled pasts, marked by run-ins with the law and failed attempts at turning their lives around. Desperation had driven them to this quiet suburb, where they hoped to find unsuspecting victims who wouldn't put up much of a fight. Jake, the more aggressive of the two, nudged Marcus and nodded toward Evelyn. "Look at her," he whispered, his voice low and gravelly. "She's old, slow, and probably got cash in that fancy purse of hers. This'll be quick." Marcus hesitated, glancing nervously at Max. The dog seemed calm enough, trotting along beside Evelyn without so much as a growl. Still, something about the way Max carried himself made Marcus uneasy. "You sure about this?" he asked, frowning. "That dog looks, I don't know, kinda big." "Big doesn't mean dangerous," Jake snapped back, rolling his eyes. "It's just some old lady and her mutt. What's the worst that could happen? The dog barks at us. Big deal." Marcus didn't argue further. He knew better than to question Jake once his mind was made up. Besides, they needed the money badly. Rent was due on their rundown motel room, and their pockets were practically empty. If they wanted to eat tomorrow, or even keep a roof over their heads, they had to act fast. The pair hung back for a few minutes, letting Evelyn and Max move farther down the path. When the duo turned onto a narrow side street that led to an alleyway, Jake grinned. "Perfect," he muttered under his breath. The alley was dimly, barely lit by a flickering street lamp, its cobblestone ground littered with discarded wrappers and stray bits of trash. It was secluded, hidden from view, and exactly what they were looking for. "You stay behind me," Jake instructed Marcus as they crept closer. "If she tries anything funny, grab the dog. Keep him busy while I get the purse." Marcus swallowed hard but nodded reluctantly. He didn't like the idea of tangling with a dog, no matter how harmless it seemed. But Jake was already moving forward, his steps quick and determined. There was no turning back now. Evelyn entered the alley first, unaware of the danger lurking just steps behind her. Max paused briefly at the entrance, his ears twitching as if he'd caught a strange sound. For a moment, he stood perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the shadows ahead. Then, with a soft huff, he continued walking, staying close to Evelyn's side. To anyone watching, it might have looked like he was simply doing his job, keeping pace with his owner. But deep inside, something primal stirred within him. Years of training had taught Max to recognize threats, even when they weren't immediately visible. And tonight, the air carried a scent he didn't trust, a mix of sweat, fear, and ill intent. Jake and Marcus exchanged one final glance before stepping into the alley. Their hearts pounded with a mix of adrenaline and nerves, but neither man showed any sign of backing down. They moved silently, closing the gap between themselves and Evelyn. In their minds, this was going to be an easy score: a frail old woman, a quiet neighborhood, and a dog that probably spent most of its time napping on the porch. How wrong they were about to discover they truly were. The days following the incident in the alley became a whirlwind of attention for Evelyn and Max. News of their encounter spread quickly through the neighborhood, fueled by word of mouth and local media coverage. By the time the weekend rolled around, Evelyn found herself at the center of an impromptu community gathering held in the park where she and Max took their daily walks. Neighbors young and old gathered to celebrate not just the bravery of the duo, but also the sense of safety they inspired in everyone around them. A small stage had been set up near the duck pond, decorated with banners that read "Heroes Among Us" in bold letters. Evelyn sat in a folding chair at the front, her posture as poised as ever, while Max lay calmly at her feet, soaking up the admiration like the seasoned professional he was. Children giggled and pointed excitedly at him, while adults exchanged stories about how much they admired both Evelyn's resilience and Max's protective instincts. It was clear that the pair had become symbols of courage and unity within the community. Local officials spoke briefly during the event, praising Evelyn and Max for their actions. "What happened that night wasn't just about stopping a crime," said one council member, addressing the crowd. "It reminded us all that even in our quiet little suburb, there are everyday heroes among us. People like Mrs. Harper and her incredible dog." The audience erupted into applause, and Evelyn smiled modestly, brushing off the praise with a wave of her hand. Max did most of the work, she quipped, earning laughter and cheers from the crowd. Veterans groups from nearby towns also reached out to honor Max's service. A representative from a national K-9 organization presented him with a special commendation medal, pinning it carefully onto his collar. "This dog has spent years protecting those who protect us," the representative said, his voice filled pride. "And now, in his retirement, he continues to serve. That's what makes him, and you, a true hero." Evelyn beamed as cameras flashed, capturing the moment for posterity. Amidst the celebration, Evelyn couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and support. Strangers approached her throughout the day to thank her personally, sharing stories of how her courage had inspired them. One woman recounted how she'd started walking her own dog more confidently after hearing about Max's heroics. Another man admitted he'd always been nervous about taking evening strolls alone, but now felt safer knowing someone like Evelyn lived nearby. Each story touched her deeply, reinforcing the idea that small acts of bravery could ripple outward, touching lives far beyond what anyone might expect. For Max, the event was a mix of excitement and exhaustion. He endured countless pats on the head and photo opportunities with wide-eyed children, his tail wagging patiently despite the attention. At one point, a group of kids gathered around him, peppering Evelyn with questions about his training and past missions. She answered each query thoughtfully, painting a picture of Max's life before retirement, his deployments overseas, his role in search and rescue operations, and the bond they'd formed since adopting him. "He may look like any other dog," she told them with a twinkle in her eye, "but don't let that fool you. This guy is a warrior." As the sun began to set and the gathering wound down, Evelyn allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. Sitting on a bench overlooking the pond, she watched as Max trotted ahead, chasing a butterfly with the playful energy of a pup half his age. Despite everything they'd been through, the danger, the chaos, the newfound fame, life seemed to have returned to its peaceful rhythm. Yet something had shifted. Evelyn no longer saw their evening walks as routine. Instead, she viewed them as moments of gratitude, reminders of how fortunate she was to share her days with such a remarkable companion. And though neither Evelyn nor Max sought recognition, the legacy of that night lingered, not just in the hearts of those who knew them, but in the renewed sense of strength and solidarity that swept through the entire neighborhood. Together, they had proven that even in the face of fear, ordinary people and extraordinary dogs could rise to the occasion and make a difference. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, slicing through the tense silence of the alley. Jake and Marcus exchanged panicked glances, their earlier bravado replaced by sheer desperation. They knew they were out of options. Evelyn stood calmly, her hand resting on Max's back as he remained vigilant, his sharp eyes tracking their every move. The two men shifted uncomfortably, their attempts to appear nonchalant crumbling under the weight of impending consequences. Jake was the first to break. "Look, lady," he began, his voice trembling. "We're sorry, okay? We didn't mean for things to go this far." He gestured toward Max with a shaky hand. "We thought, I don't know, that your dog was just some regular pet. We had no idea he was, well, this." He swallowed hard, glancing nervously at the German shepherd, who still radiated an aura of authority. Even without barking or growling, Max's mere presence commanded respect and fear. Marcus chimed in, his tone pleading. "Yeah, we messed up. Big time. But it's not like we hurt you or anything, right? Can't we just call it even?" His words trailed off lamely as Evelyn fixed him with a steely gaze. There was no anger in her expression, only quiet determination. She understood their fear. It was palpable. But she also knew that letting them walk away would send the wrong message. This wasn't just about her. It was about sending a clear signal that such behavior wouldn't be tolerated in her community. "You made your choice when you decided to follow me into this alley," Evelyn said firmly, her voice cutting through the night air. "And now you'll face the consequences of that choice." Her word hung heavy in the space between them, leaving no room for negotiation. Jake opened his mouth as if to argue further, but the distant flash of red and blue lights silenced him instantly. The police were almost here. As the patrol cars screeched to a halt at the entrance of the alley, both men visibly deflated. Officers spilled out of the vehicles, their flashlights cutting through the dimness as they assessed the scene. One officer approached cautiously, his hand resting on his holster as he took in the sight before him. Evelyn standing tall despite her age, Max poised protectively beside her, and two disheveled men looking utterly defeated. "What's going on here?" the officer asked, his voice firm but calm. Evelyn stepped forward slightly, keeping Max close. "These two attempted to rob me," she explained, her tone measured. "They followed me into the alley and tried to take my purse. Thankfully, my dog intervened before they could do any real harm." She gestured toward Max, whose ears perked up at the mention of his role in the evening's events. The officers quickly moved to restrain Jake and Marcus, reading them their rights as they were handcuffed and led toward the patrol cars. Both men offered weak apologies as they passed Evelyn, their voices tinged with regret. "We didn't know," Marcus muttered again, shaking his head. "Should have known better," Jake added, avoiding eye contact altogether. Their earlier arrogance had evaporated entirely, replaced by shame and disbelief at how drastically their plan had backfired. Once the suspects were secured in the patrol cars, one of the officers turned back to Evelyn. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. Evelyn nodded, offering a small smile. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied. "It's all thanks to Max here." She patted the dog affectionately, and Max responded with a soft wag of his tail, a rare display of relaxation after the intensity of the past few minutes. The officer knelt down briefly to examine Max, clearly impressed. "This guy's something else," he remarked, admiration evident in his tone. "Looks like he handled the situation better than most humans would have." Evelyn chuckled softly. "He's trained for situations like this," she explained. "He might be retired, but he hasn't forgotten a thing." The officer nodded knowingly, jotting down notes as he prepared to file his report. As the commotion began to die down, Evelyn took a moment to reflect on what had just happened. She felt a mix of emotions, relief that it was over, pride in Max's actions, and gratitude for the quick response of the authorities. But above all, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. In a world where people often underestimated others based on appearances, tonight had proven that strength and courage came in unexpected forms. And for Evelyn, there was no greater ally than the loyal dog who stood steadfastly by her side. The narrow alley stretched ahead, its uneven cobblestones glistening faintly under the flickering glow of the street lamp. Evelyn walked slowly, her cane tapping rhythmically against the ground as Max padded silently beside her. The sounds of the park had faded behind them, replaced by an eerie stillness that seemed to press in from all sides. Unbeknownst to her, danger was closing in fast. Jake and Marcus moved with calculated urgency, their footsteps muffled on the damp stones. They stayed close to the shadows, keeping just enough distance to avoid detection, until it was too late. Jake signaled for Marcus to move around to the other side of the alley, positioning himself to block any chance of escape. Evelyn paused for a moment, adjusting her grip on her cane, unaware of the trap being set around her. Suddenly, Jake lunged forward, his hand clamping down hard on Evelyn's arm. Startled, she gasped, stumbling slightly as the force of his grip threw her off balance. "Give me your purse," he growled, his voice low but sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. Evelyn froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Her fingers tightened instinctively around the strap of her bag, holding it closer to her body. Marcus stepped out from the shadows, blocking the way back toward the park. His presence loomed large, his bulky frame casting a long shadow across the alley. "Don't try anything funny," he warned, his tone laced with nervous energy. He glanced uneasily at Max, who had already shifted into a protective stance between Evelyn and her attackers. The dog's muscles were taut, his weight balanced evenly on all fours, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. For a brief second, Jake sneered down at Max, dismissing him as nothing more than an aging pet. "What's this old mutt gonna do?" he scoffed, his lips curling into a cruel smirk. "Bark at us? Big deal." But even as he spoke, there was something unnerving about the way Max stood. His ears pricked forward, his eyes locked onto Jake with an intensity that sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. Evelyn, though frightened, found strength in the steady presence of her loyal companion. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm despite the chaos swirling around her. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she reached out and rested her hand on Max's back. It was a gesture of reassurance for both of them. Max leaned slightly into her touch, his tail remaining still, every fiber of his being focused on the threat before him. Then, without warning, Max acted. With the precision of a seasoned soldier, he surged forward, his powerful body colliding squarely with Jake's legs. Caught completely off guard, Jake stumbled backward, letting go of Evelyn's arm as he crashed to the ground. A startled yelp escaped his lips, followed by a groan of pain as Max pinned him down, his teeth bared in a silent snarl. Jake flailed wildly, trying to push the dog away, but Max held firm, his training kicking in with flawless efficiency. Marcus stared in stunned disbelief, frozen in place as he watched his partner struggle beneath the formidable German shepherd. "Get him off me," Jake shouted, panic rising in his voice. Marcus hesitated, torn between fear and the need to help. Finally, he took a tentative step forward, only to be met with a deafening bark that echoed through the alley. Max's commanding voice reverberated in the confined space, stopping Marcus dead in his tracks. It wasn't just the volume of the bark that shook him, it was the authority behind it. There was no mistaking the fact that this animal meant business. Marcus raised his hands instinctively, taking a step back as his bravado crumbled. "Tell you we didn't know. We didn't mean," he stammered, his words trailing off as Max turned his piercing gaze toward him. For the first time in years, Marcus felt truly afraid, not of another person, but of a dog who clearly wasn't going to back down. Evelyn seized the opportunity to regain control of the situation. Stepping back slightly, she straightened her posture and addressed Max in a firm, clear voice. "Halt," she commanded in German, her tone unwavering. Max immediately obeyed, shifting his stance to maintain a defensive position without escalating further. Though he remained alert and ready, his focus never wavered from the two men now visibly trembling before him. In that moment, the tables had turned completely. What had started as an ambush had quickly become a lesson in underestimating both humans and animals alike. Jake and Marcus, once confident in their plan, now realized they had made a grave mistake, one that would leave them reeling long after the night was over. In the days that followed the community gathering, Jake and Marcus found themselves facing the full weight of their actions. Their mugshots appeared in local newspapers, accompanied by headlines like "Would-be thieves learn hard lesson from retired K-9 hero." The story became a talking point across the town, and even caught the attention of regional news outlets. It was impossible to escape the irony. Two grown men had been thwarted not by a security guard or police officer, but by a senior citizen and her dog. During their court appearances, both men looked defeated, heads bowed, eyes avoiding the crowd of reporters and curious onlookers. Jake, usually quick with a sarcastic remark, sat silently as the judge reviewed the details of the case. Marcus, visibly shaken, fidgeted in his seat, occasionally glancing toward Evelyn, who had chosen to attend the proceedings. She wasn't there for revenge or vindication. She simply wanted closure. Max stayed home that day, resting comfortably in his favorite spot by the window, unaware of the impact he'd made beyond the walls of their cozy house. The prosecutor painted a vivid picture of the events that night, emphasizing how close Jake and Marcus had come to committing a violent crime. These defendants targeted an elderly woman, a member of our community who has given so much of herself over the years, the prosecutor stated firmly. They showed no regard for her safety or humanity, assuming she would be an easy victim. What they didn't count on was her courage and the unparalleled skill of her retired military canine. Both men listened intently, their expressions a mix of regret and disbelief. When given the opportunity to speak, Marcus cleared his throat nervously before addressing the court. I just want to say we're sorry," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't mean to hurt anyone. We were desperate, and we made a terrible mistake. If we could go back and change things, we would." Jake nodded vigorously in agreement, adding, "That dog, he's something else. He didn't have to hurt us, but he stopped us anyway. We learned our lesson, Your Honor. Please believe us." The judge regarded them coolly, taking a moment to consider their words. Finally, she delivered her verdict. Jail time for both men, along with mandatory rehabilitation programs aimed at helping them turn their lives around. As they were led out of the courtroom, Evelyn felt a strange sense of relief, not because they were being punished, but because justice had been served fairly. She hoped this experience might serve as a turning point for them, forcing them to confront the choices that had led them down such a destructive path. Back home, life returned to its peaceful rhythm for Evelyn and Max. The media attention gradually faded, though neighbors still stopped by occasionally to thank them or share how inspired they were by their bravery. Children continued to flock to Max, eager to meet the hero dog who had saved the day. Evelyn welcomed the visits warmly, using them as opportunities to teach kids about kindness, responsibility, and standing up for what's right, even when it seems scary. One afternoon, as Evelyn watered her garden, a young boy named Tommy approached her shyly, clutching the handmade card. "This is for you and Max," he said, holding it out with both hands. Inside was a colorful drawing of a German shepherd standing protectively beside an elderly woman. At the top, written in bold letters, were the words, "Thank you for being brave." Evelyn knelt down to hug him, touched by the gesture. "You know, Tommy," she said gently, "bravery isn't always about doing big things. Sometimes it's about doing the right thing, even when it's hard." Tommy nodded thoughtfully, then turned to pet Max, who wagged his tail lazily in response. Watching the exchange, Evelyn felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the love and companionship Max provided, but for the way their bond had brought people together. In a world often divided by fear and misunderstanding, their story had reminded everyone of the power of trust, loyalty, and second chances. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood, Evelyn took a moment to savor the quiet beauty of the evening. With Max by her side, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be, safe, loved, and surrounded by a community that had rallied behind them. Together, they had faced danger and emerged stronger, proving that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, even those with 4 legs and a heart full of courage. In a quiet little suburb where life moved at a gentle pace, Mrs. Evelyn Harper was known as the heart of the community. At 78 years old, she had lived in the same cozy home for over 4 decades. Her garden was always the brightest on the block, bursting with colorful flowers that seemed to welcome everyone who passed by. Neighbors often stopped to chat with her during their morning walks or waved hello as they drove by. Evelyn might have been elderly, but there was nothing frail about her spirit. She carried herself with grace and warmth, making her one of the most beloved figures in town. What made Evelyn even more special was her constant companion, Max, a large German shepherd with a sleek coat of black and tan fur. To anyone unfamiliar with him, Max looked like an ordinary dog, albeit a handsome one. But those who knew Evelyn well understood that Max wasn't just any pet. He was a retired military canine, a highly trained soldier who had spent years serving overseas. His days of active duty were behind him now, but his instincts remained razor-sharp. Despite his age, Max still walked tall, his ears perked up and his eyes scanning his surroundings with unwavering focus. Evelyn had adopted Max after he retired from service. It was love at first sight for both of them. For Evelyn, having Max by her side gave her a sense of security she hadn't felt since her husband passed away 10 years earlier. And for Max, Evelyn's kindness provided the perfect retirement. A peaceful life filled with long walks, belly rubs, and plenty of treats. Though he no longer wore a uniform or followed commands from soldiers, Max never lost the discipline ingrained in him during his training. He was loyal to a fault, protective of Evelyn, and always ready to spring into action if needed. The neighborhood adored Max almost as much as they loved Evelyn. Children would giggle as they tried to sneak up on him, only to find him lying perfectly still, pretending not to notice until the last possible moment before playfully wagging his tail. Adults admired how calm and composed he was, even around loud noises or chaotic situations. Some joked that Max was more like a bodyguard than a dog, but Evelyn simply smiled and said, "He's both." Every evening, rain or shine, Evelyn took Max for a walk through the nearby park. They followed the same route each time, down the tree-lined path, past the duck pond, and along the edge of the woods. It was their ritual, a cherished part of their day. People grew accustomed to seeing the pair together, Evelyn moving slowly but steadily, leaning on her cane, while Max trotted beside her, his head held high. No one ever imagined that this routine would one day lead to something extraordinary, or that Max's past would come roaring back in a way no one could predict. Though the suburb was generally safe, crime wasn't unheard of. Occasionally, news reports mentioned petty thefts or break-ins, but such incidents were rare enough that most residents didn't think twice about them. Evelyn certainly didn't worry. She trusted Max implicitly. If anything were to happen, she knew he'd be there to protect her. What she didn't know was that two strangers were about to make a grave mistake, one that would change everything. Weeks turned into months, and the incident in the alley became a story passed down in hushed tones at neighborhood gatherings. For Evelyn, life returned to its quiet rhythm, though it was now tinged with a newfound sense of purpose. She continued her daily walks with Max, their routine unchanged but imbued with deeper meaning. Each step through the park felt like a celebration of resilience, a reminder that even in moments of vulnerability, strength could emerge from unexpected places. Jake and Marcus, meanwhile, began serving their sentences in separate facilities, each grappling with the weight of their mistakes. Behind bars, they found themselves reflecting on the night that had changed everything. Jake often replayed the image of Max pinning him down, the sheer power and precision of the dog's movements etched into his memory. It wasn't just fear he remembered, it was respect. "That dog didn't need to hurt me," Jake confided to his cellmate one evening. "He could have torn me apart if he wanted to. But he didn't. He just stopped me." Marcus echoed similar sentiments during group therapy sessions mandated by the court. "I thought I knew what danger looked like," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "But I never imagined I'd meet someone like that lady or her dog. They taught me something I'll never forget. Don't judge people based on how they look. You never know what they're capable of." These lessons, though painful, became stepping stones toward change. Both men vowed to use their time in prison wisely, determined to rebuild their lives upon release. For Evelyn, forgiveness came naturally, not because she condoned their actions, but because holding on to anger served no purpose. During one visit to the local community center, where she occasionally volunteered, she shared her thoughts with a small group of residents. "What those men did was wrong," she said softly, her hands folded in her lap. "But I believe everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes. If my story helps them become better people, then maybe some good can come out of all this." Her words resonated deeply with those who heard them, inspiring conversations about compassion and second chances. The community rallied around initiatives aimed at supporting former offenders re-entering society, ensuring they wouldn't fall back into old patterns. Evelyn herself played a small role in these efforts, offering encouragement to volunteers and sharing her belief that redemption was possible for anyone willing to seek it. As winter approached, Evelyn noticed subtle changes in Max. His once spry gait slowed slightly, his muzzle graying more with each passing day. Yet his spirit remained undiminished, his loyalty unwavering. On crisp mornings, as frost clung to the grass, Evelyn wrapped herself in a warm scarf and set out with Max, their breath visible in the chilly air. Children still ran up to greet them, eager to hear stories of Max's heroics. "Did you really take down 2 bad guys?" one little girl asked wide-eyed during one such encounter. Evelyn chuckled, patting Max affectionately. "He sure did," she replied. "And he did it without raising a fuss, just like the true professional he is." The bond between Evelyn and Max grew stronger with time, a testament to the years they had shared and the challenges they had overcome together. For Evelyn, Max wasn't just a pet or protector. He was family, a steadfast companion who reminded her daily of the beauty in trust and partnership. And for Max, Evelyn was his anchor, the person who had given him a loving home after years of service. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Evelyn leaned back in her chair, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Life had tested her, but it had also rewarded her with moments of triumph and connection. She glanced down at Max, whose head rested gently on her foot, his eyes half closed in contentment. "You're quite the hero, you know," she whispered, smiling. Max let out a soft sigh, as if acknowledging the compliment, before drifting off to sleep. In the end, their story was more than just a tale of bravery or justice. It was a lesson in humanity. It reminded everyone who heard it that courage comes in many forms, that appearances can be deceiving, and that even in the darkest moments, light can shine through. For Evelyn and Max, the journey wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about standing firm in the face of adversity and proving that love, loyalty, and resilience could conquer fear. Together, they had shown the world that heroes aren't defined by their size or strength, but by the hearts they carry within. The alley was eerily quiet now, save for the ragged breathing of Jake and Marcus. Jake lay sprawled on the ground, his arms flailing uselessly as Max held him firmly in place with a low growl rumbling deep in his throat. Though Max hadn't bitten or harmed him, the sheer weight of the dog's body pressing down on his chest made it clear that resistance was futile. Marcus stood frozen a few feet away, his hands still raised in surrender, his wide eyes darting between Max and Evelyn. Evelyn, though shaken, summoned every ounce of courage she had left. She took another step back, putting some distance between herself and the men while keeping one hand gently resting on Max's back. Her voice remained steady as she spoke again, this time not to Max, but to her attackers. "You picked the wrong person tonight," she said, her tone calm yet firm. There was no anger in her words, only resolve. "And you definitely underestimated my dog." Jake squirmed under Max's watchful gaze, his earlier bravado completely gone. "Call him off," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "We're sorry. We didn't know he was like this." He gestured weakly toward Max, who responded with a low, menacing bark that sent both men recoiling further. Marcus stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet as he tried to put more space between himself and the imposing German shepherd. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. Instead, She studied them carefully, taking note of their disheveled appearances, the nervous twitch in Marcus's hands, the sweat beading on Jake's forehead. These weren't hardened criminals. They were desperate men making reckless decisions. Still, desperation was no excuse for violence, and Evelyn knew better than to let her guard down. With a practiced ease born from years of caring for Max, she issued another command in German. "Watch." Max instantly shifted his stance, stepping slightly away from Jake, but remaining alert. His ears stayed pricked forward, his sharp eyes never leaving the two men. The message was clear. They weren't getting anywhere near Evelyn without facing the full force of Max's training. It was a delicate balance, one that showcased Max's discipline. He wasn't there to attack indiscriminately, but to protect, and, if necessary, intimidate. Marcus finally found his voice, though it cracked as he spoke. "We didn't mean nothing by it, Mom," he stammered, glancing nervously at Evelyn. We needed money. We didn't think anyone would get hurt." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "That's where you went wrong," she replied coolly. "You don't think when you choose to hurt someone else, and you certainly don't expect people, or animals, to sit quietly and take it." Jake groaned, trying unsuccessfully to sit up despite Max's looming presence. Okay, we messed up," he blurted out, panic edging into his voice. "Just call your dog off. All right. We'll leave. We won't bother you again." Evelyn considered this for a moment, then shook her head slowly. "No," she said simply. "You don't get to walk away so easily, not after what you've done." Her next move surprised even herself. Reaching into her pocket with her free hand, Evelyn pulled out her medical alert device, a small gadget she carried in case of emergencies. She pressed the button firmly, activating its connection to local authorities. Within seconds, a dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker embedded in the device. "This is emergency services. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Evelyn answered, her voice clear and composed. "But I have 2 intruders here who attempted to rob me. Please send help immediately." As she gave the operator her location, Jake and Marcus exchanged panicked looks. Their plan had unraveled spectacularly, and now there was no escape. Marcus muttered something under his breath, shaking his head in disbelief. "We should have just walked away," he mumbled, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Throughout it all, Max remained the epitome of control. His posture radiated authority, his movements deliberate and precise. To Evelyn, he was more than just a pet. He was a guardian, a protector trained to handle situations far worse than this. And to Jake and Marcus, he was something else entirely, a reminder that appearances could be deceiving. They had dismissed him as an old dog, harmless and slow. But now, staring into his intense, unwavering gaze, they realized how wrong they had been. As the distant wail of sirens began to fill the air, Evelyn allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Justice was on its way. And thanks to Max, she hadn't had to face this ordeal alone.